Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the seminar today, the webinar today. My name is Caroline Fukushima, and I'll be acting as the chair of this webinar. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Turku in Finland, where I work with conservation and invertebrate trade. And I'm thrilled to have you all here in this session, which is part of the activities of the Cost Action GLITSS, Globalization, Illicit Trade, Sustainability and Security, of which I am a member. So today, the webinar is called The Use of the European Trade Control and Expert System, TRACES, to collect the data on the imports of wildlife to the EU, the marine ornamental fish trade as a case study. And we are fortunate to have here Dr. Ricardo Calado from the University of Aveiro and Dr. Mônica Biondo from the Foundation Franz Weber. And here's how the session will work. Our speakers will give the presentation first, and then we'll have the questions in the end. So save your questions for the end. And if you think in a question while they're presenting, please feel free to drop the question in the chat, or you can raise your hand after the end of the presentation. So I'm happy to introduce our speakers. So Mônica Biondo is here, and she obtained her PhD in Ecology and Evolution in 2019 from the University of Bern, Switzerland. She started her research on trade in marine ornamental fishes in 2010 and has been the head of research and conservation at the Foundation Franz Weber since 2013. Her research focused on the control of international trade in marine ornamental fishes, specifically in coral reef fishes, in particular through the use and improvement of the European Trade Control and Expert System, TRACES, a European information system for the international trade in live animals and goods of animal origin to prevent disease outbreaks. She's the member of IUCN SSC Species Monitoring Specialist Group and the International Coral Reef Society, and contributed to the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES report, assessment report on the sustainable use of wild species in 2022. We also have Ricardo Calado here with us. He obtained his PhD in biology with specialization in animal biotechnology in 2005 from the Faculty of Science of the University of Lisbon in Portugal. In 2008, he joined the University of Aveiro, where he is now coordinating researcher and develops independent research on sustainable blue growth. He has authored more than 270 scientific articles, and he's co-editor-in-chief of Aquaculture, Fish and Fisheries, published by Wiley. He is the scientific coordinator of one of the research units of Ecomare, CEPAM, and one of the Portuguese blue hubs, Citaqua. He has been working with marine ornamental species for more than 25 years, with emphasis on the aquaculture, traceability, and trade. So today they will present about TRACES. Their presentation will introduce us to the European Commission's online platform called Trade Control and Expert System, TRACES, for animal and plant health certification. This monitoring tool is designed to track the import of a wide range of goods, such as live animals, animal products, specific foods and feeds of no animal origin, and most plants into the European Union, and the intra-EU trade and EU exports of animal and certain animal products. So TRACES enhance transparency and traceability within the supply chain in real time, enabling swift response to potential risks associated with animal and plant imports that could impact the public health. This system plays a crucial role in preventing the introduction and spread of transmissible diseases. And then through a case study on marine ornamental fish trade, they will highlight both the significant value and some shortcomings of the system. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. And I will start with an introduction to traces and then share some insights into the marine ornamental fish trade to the EU based on findings that Ricardo and I and some other colleagues have uncovered, primarily using traces, and that we have then published in scientific journals. And Ricardo will complement me and also answer to questions at the end. So Caroline has already given you a lot of information, but let me move on by saying that GLITSS focuses on the illegal trade of goods, but it also looks at sustainability and security. And so the legal aspects of wildlife trade are also very important. Therefore, here, first of all, a couple of information on the legal wildlife trade, which is largely unexamined despite its scale. Globally, it is worth 145 to 220 billion every year, US dollars. And the EU alone has a value, the estimated value for the EU trade alone of wildlife is of 100 billion every year. And in comparison, the global illegal wildlife trade is estimated to be worth between 8 and 20 billion annually. And the largest categories for this wildlife trade are fishes. This includes also food fishes, of course, and furniture and fashion. So when we speak about wildlife, we don't mean only animals. A lot of people mean only animals, but also wild species of plants like timber and so on. And of this trade, more than a third is not declared at species level. And this is already the problem we are aiming at, but they are declared at broader codes. This means that not a specific species is named that is imported into the EU, but some group of animals or plants. So to introduce to you traces, I thought it well to introduce to you a short video that the EU Commission has produced, which explains what traces does. To do this, I quickly have to get out of the sharing and open this. Excuse me. And I hope that it will work quickly. Can you see the video?
Yes.
Okay. Can you also hear?
No, just see it.
El sistema TRACES es una plataforma multilingüe de la Comisión Europea que sirve para realizar la certificación sanitaria y fitosanitaria de los productos que se importan en la Unión Europea. Animales vivos, productos destinados a consumo humano de origen animal, productos de origen no animal destinados a consumo humano, plantas o productos de alimentación animal.
Donc le but final, c'est la santé des végétaux, c'est la santé animale et la santé humaine, la santé des écosystèmes. Grâce à TRACES, un inspecteur il peut créer une alerte sanitaire en temps réel. Et le pays exportateur, il va être immédiatement notifié, informé, la Commission européenne également. Tous les postes frontaliers de l'Union européenne auront accès à cette alerte sanitaire. Donc ça permet de prendre des mesures rapides et efficaces pour lutter contre l'introduction d'organismes nuisibles, des pathogènes.
El origen del sistema TRACES a principios de los años 2000 lo creó la Comisión Europea para facilitar los intercambios comerciales por medio de la certificación sanitaria y es la propia Comisión la que mantiene actualizado continuamente el sistema. Disfrutamos desde finales de 2019 de la nueva plataforma TRACES-NT y además la plataforma incluye numerosos datos como por ejemplo las autorizaciones de los establecimientos de terceros países que la plataforma permite el acceso continuado y actualizado gracias al servicio de la Comisión. Actualmente hasta 85 países en todo el mundo están utilizando el sistema TRACES, todos los Estados miembros de la Unión Europea y otros muchos estados externos, ya que es una herramienta multilingüe que tiene actualmente hasta 34 idiomas, de manera que esto facilita el intercambio de datos en cualquier idioma sin dificultad.
Les sardines qui sont pêchées au Maroc, à Tanger, par exemple, qui vont être exportés vers l'Union européenne. Avant l'exportation, il y a un contrôle obligatoire. L'opérateur économique, il va notifier une partie du certificat qui concerne la description de la marchandise. Il va soumettre ces informations à l'autorité compétente du Maroc. Ils vont vérifier la conformité de cette marchandise, donc ils vont certifier la deuxième partie du certificat sanitaire.
Cet échange n'existait pas avant Trust. Avant, c'était des échanges papier, des documents qui arrivent. Maintenant, il y a un échange qui se fait en temps réel. L'opérateur, maintenant, il n'a pas besoin de se déplacer pour récupérer les certificats. Tout se passe au niveau du système. Il soumet la demande au service de contrôle. Les services de contrôle les valident, les signent électroniquement et toute l'information est dans le système. Et il y a un échange entre les autorités compétentes de l'Union européenne, nos autorités compétentes marocaines et l'opérateur économique. Donc, toute l'information, il circule en temps réel.
Entonces, los productos de la pesca se cargan en camiones y pasan en ferries por el estrecho de Gibraltar y llegan aquí, que es el punto de entrada dentro del territorio de la Unión. Y nosotros en el puesto de control fronterizo llevamos a cabo los controles para que después puedan llevar a cabo ya cualquier movimiento dentro de la Unión porque gozan de un estatus ya de libre circulación una vez que son inspeccionados por este servicio. Una vez que se lleva a cabo, se finalizan los controles, se procede a autorizar el despacho de la partida para su libre circulación dentro de la Unión y ese despacho se realiza mediante el sistema TRACES.
Le système TRACE a été mis en place pour le marché unique, mais également pour la protection des consommateurs. Alors, quels sont les utilisateurs de ce système? Vous avez donc les pays européens ainsi que les pays tiers. Et puis, vous avez également les exportateurs, les importateurs, mais également les transitaires.
Et pour les transitaires, c'est un atout puisqu'ils gagnent énormément de temps. Il va récupérer les certificats sanitaires dématérialisés. Et grâce à une fonctionnalité qui s'appelle clonage, il va récupérer ces informations pour créer un document sanitaire commun d'entrée. Ça, c'est le document que l'on utilise à l'intérieur de l'Union européenne et qui va justement permettre aux importateurs de récupérer une marchandise qui est conforme. Ensuite, et ça, c'est la partie finale sur cette chaîne, cette marchandise, elle va être contrôlée à l'aéroport de Roissy par les inspecteurs vétérinaires qui vont enregistrer les données des contrôles et qui vont signer électroniquement avec les mêmes systèmes. Un douanier il va procéder à la libération de la marchandise pour les marchés intérieurs.
Una de las principales ventajas del sistema TRACES es la certificación electrónica.
Pour nous, c'était une révolution par rapport à ce qui se faisait avant. On n'avait plus besoin d'imprimer les certificats, on n'avait plus besoin de les signer, de les cacheter, que ce soit avec un cachet humide ou un cachet sec. Donc, tout est signé électroniquement.
Puesto que mediante la firma electrónica se agilizan los procedimientos administrativos y se facilita el archivo de toda esta información.
Alors, nous sommes au niveau des archives du service alimentation de la DAF, donc de la Direction d'agriculture de la Martinique. Et je souhaite vous montrer la quantité de papier qu'on générait quand on n'avait pas encore la signature électronique avec le système TRACE.
Además, una vez
So I hope you can see my screen again. This was an introduction that the EU Commission made to explain what TRACES is, and I hope that I can give you now a little bit more detail because as Carolina already said, that TRACES is the European Commission's online platform for health certification of imports. So it's, but not only imports into the EU, but also within the EU, the intra-EU trade and exports of live animals, animal products, plants, and related goods. And it is in use since 2004. And as you have seen in the last image before, everything was done on paper and it produced a lot of papers. And all traders, carriers must be registered. And currently there are 90 countries who are using TRACES to do commerce with the EU, with 113,000 users of TRACES, and TRACES is available in 39 languages today. And since 2014, TRACES is also collecting specific information on marine ornamental fishes. TRACES has been put in place to increase transparency and traceability of food safety, and it alerts real time if there are harmful organisms or pathogens coming into the EU. And as we heard in the film, it is saving a lot of time to EU member states, but also third parties, carriers, and everyone involved. The electronic signature is really very important because it enhances authenticity and security and reduces the possibility of forging or losing paper documents. And although we have seen TRACES is not a specific tool to monitor wildlife trade, it does so for biosecurity reason already. As we heard in the beginning, it is very important that the species entering the EU, animal or plants or parts of it, are specifically on species level, so we know what is really coming in. And there is a legal framework which provides this ruling in the animal health law, and there are at least these 3 articles which require that species entering the EU are declared at species level information. But we will see further on that this is a bit of a challenge. This is how I started out with my studies, which became my PhD in the end. I looked into this trade in 2012 because, as I explained in the beginning, I got hooked by a proposal in the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species at the conference. The US wanted to protect a species of a little coral fish. Unfortunately, it never happened. And so this brought me to the idea, but what is actually happening in my country? How many of these marine ornamental fishes are entering Switzerland? And so I asked my government if I could go and look at the import papers. And this is what I found. In the beginning, when everything was on paper for the marine ornamentals, you would have just this document. I hope you can see what I'm pointing at. And it's called Zierfische in German, and these are ornamental fishes, so marine and freshwater fishes together. And the HS code, the Harmonized Systems Code, was just 030110, which included fresh and marine species. But the import documents, the physical documents, also were accompanied by species lists, what was really being imported. And so I went through all the documents, sorted out the marine species, and did my own database. And from there, then I went on and got back to uni. And so now I would really like to show you what TRACES, the platform, looks like. I am not registered as a trader, but I am allowed as a researcher to use the training platform, which is just not active, but it shows you exactly what is possible with TRACES. So once you enter the platform, this is what you will see. And to import live animals, you need to produce the so-called CHED, which is the Common Health Entry Document. So you click here on CHED, and the system will bring you to the next page. And here you will create a new CHED. And once you create a new CHED, the system will ask you, well, for which species do you want to create a CHED? And I will show you now what you need to do if you want to import marine ornamental species. So you have to click on fish and crustaceans, and then the tab opens and you get the different possibilities that you can choose from. And as you can see, the fresh fishes, first you have ornamental fishes, then you have fresh fishes of ornament, and then you have the other than fresh fishes. And so anything other than fresh water ornamental fishes are marine ornamental fishes. And so you choose this box here, and then you click done, and you start filling in this form online. And so, of course, you have to give the name of the exporter, the importer, and I have just produced these screenshots. If anyone is interested, I can also show you in real time what it looks like online later on. And then you have to give information on the border control information. And as you see, I'm the person who is put here as the the control post for this shipment. And then you have to give the information on the operator, and I'm the operator as well. And some fields you have to fill in, the ones with an asterisk, and the other ones are just filled in automatically, or is information that you can but must not give. You don't have to give it. And then the place of destination is also very important. And as you see in the training platform, you can choose any name that is given by the system. And I chose something in Switzerland. And this is the address where this shipment would be going to in Switzerland. And then you have to choose the means of transport. And in the case of marine ornamental fishes, everything comes by plane into Europe. And so you choose airplane, and then you can give the flight number. And if it's a real shipment, of course, you have many more information that you can that you have to give so that the shipment arrives on time, and the carrier is also at the airport to collect the shipment. And then you have to give more transport information, what time the airplane arrives and so on, and also the utilization. And here you have different categories. And in our case, these are ornamental aquatic animals. And then it goes on saying, what's the purpose? Are you just transshipping these fishes, or are you keeping them in the European market? And we keep them in the European market. And then how are they transported from the airport to the end destination in the EU? And so I chose road vehicle. And now we get to the more juicy part, which really interested us, is the description of the consignments and the goods. And here you find again this HAS, this Harmonized Systems Code for marine ornamental fishes. And now you can start inputting the information of what you are importing. And in this case, I just chose the Chromis viridis, which is the most traded species that we will see later on, and just put in the name. And the system finished writing what I was trying to write. And then I said that I was importing 200 units, 200 fishes, and they all came from Indonesia. And now, since 2019, Traces is updated all the time. It gets better and better. They add and take away things that are not necessary. In 2009, it had an overhaul, which was really important. It started allowing the import of Excel files or CSV files. And so if you click on this button here, it will bring you to this window, and here you can import an Excel file. And this is very, very useful because they offer a template. This is what happens if I click on the template, and it's just a file with the columns which already tell you what you have to put in. So if I have 20 different species of fish, I just add the name in here and then give the quantity, the amount of packaging, where it came from, and so on. And the system will import all this information automatically into Traces. Before this, there was a time where you had a box that you had to tick for every species or higher taxa. And now you can import just your lists, because if I'm importing a good, I know exactly what I want to buy and what I want to pay for. So the list is already correct. And then you import this list. And in the end, you have to give this electronic signature which certifies that the document is complete and not false, and it is true. So this is how Traces works. But the user interface also has at the moment a couple of challenges or problems that we think should really be resolved, at least with regards to wildlife trade, which could technically easily be resolved. So I bring you back to the HS code that I entered to import marine ornamental fishes. And as I just said, you can import Excel files. It allows scientific names. But the system is even better, because the system even allows you to input common names. If there are common names that are regularly in use, like for Chromis, it is called the blue-green damselfish. And the system will change the name into the scientific name automatically. This is really, really a great help for everyone importing these fishes. The downside of the system now, since 2019, is that on the one hand, you can import an Excel file, which is great. On the other hand, it allows you to give information which is not only at species level, but in larger groups. So at genus level, family level, and we have even found in the data we analyzed a couple of amphibians which were imported under the code marine ornamental fish. Another downside that needs to be resolved in our opinion is that it doesn't give you the exact origin of the species. It is a misleading term. For example, a lot of marine ornamental fishes come from Singapore, but Singapore hardly has any coral reefs, so the fishes are just collected in Singapore and then move on to Europe, and Singapore is a hub. So it really needs to state where the fishes were caught. And when we analyzed all this information, we found out that for 30% of all marine ornamental fishes entering the EU, 30% are not at species level. So we don't really know exactly what animal species is coming in. I had a project which looked at fur. We have something going on in Switzerland with regards to fur, to give you other examples. And I went into traces to see how exact traces is with regards to fur. And animal-related products can be very exact, as it can tell you exactly where they come from and what it is. But as you can see here, for fur, I had a quick search for fur, and it gives you at least 150 wild animals that are used to produce fur. But if you go into traces, you see that you only get 5 categories. So you have fur skins and artificial fur. Already artificial fur sounds strange to me because that's not even living, that's a synthetic fur, but it's under this category as well. And then if you go down the ladder, you see that you can choose from mink, you can choose lamb and different kinds of lambs, and then you can choose foxes, and then you can choose raw furs, and then you can choose parts of fur. And it's not more, the granularity is really coarse. It doesn't give you any specific information. And so in our opinion, it should not be possible not to give specific names or scientific names, to be sure that nothing, no pathogens or zoonosis possibilities are given here to be introduced into the EU. Another quick example is for reptiles. The reptiles are imported just as reptiles including snakes and turtles. And if you fill out this chat document, you will be brought to the place where you say to the system how many you want to introduce or import. And then it gives you just 6 groups. And one of it is at species level, which is the pond sliders, the pond turtle that we know. I guess you know the pond turtles that we have in Europe. But there are, according to this study that I found, at least 355 live reptile species that are imported into the EU for the pet trade, so not skins, just live animals. And of these, almost 200 are non-CITES listed. This means that CITES is not monitoring the trade of these species, and this is just legal trade. So this, in our opinion, should be much more precise. And the same is happening also for birds. As you can see here, for birds, there are just 5 categories, which are birds of prey, some parrots and parakeets, ostriches, pigeons, and some other bird species, all other bird species. But if you go into the bird subsection, then you see that at least a lot of birds, I don't know if it's all the birds, but you can find them at genus level, which is already more precise. And also, I didn't mention this before, there is the one box that you have to fill out, which is with regards to invasive species. This was introduced maybe 8 years ago, 9 years ago, that you have to tick the box if a species is invasive, and you have to give the code for this invasive species. And only if the veterinary at the border accepts this import of this species and allows you to import and gives the okay, you can then import the species. So this has been introduced later on in traces. As a fact, it is there is a near total ban, of course, of live birds coming into Europe for the moment, but I just wanted to show you what the granularity is for the import of birds in traces. So going back to the marine ornamental fish imports into Europe, traces would need an easy way. There is an easy way to really make traces perfect for the import of marine ornamental fishes. You should only allow 2-word names, because a species always has a genus and a species name. And if you make it compulsory that you have to give 2 words, you will automatically have the correct species name. And you can, as I said, also have a common name, and that system will translate it into the scientific names. Another detail that needs to be resolved is that the exact origin should be inputted into traces and not a hub like Singapore. This should not be possible. And the other thing is that you should know, is it a species wild caught, like most of the marine ornamentals are, or is the fish being captive bred? And if it is captive bred, you should give the name of the facility and the country it is in. So now I would like to move on a little bit to our work, and you have already met Ricardo and myself, and our other colleagues, the computer engineer who has helped in doing our research, or is helping with the research, is Rainer Berkey, and Francisco Aguayo, our economist, who was also very involved in our latest publication that I will show you shortly. And these are just the publications on this issue that I wanted to show you. And we started in 2015 to work on the marine ornamental fish trade. Our research has had some impact. The Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species is talking about this trade now, because so many species are potentially involved. Because of COVID, not much has happened yet, but we have also met with the EU and EU Commission. Ricardo and I even went to Brussels a couple of years ago, and the EU Parliament even made a resolution on October 5th to the CITES Convention, which took place in Panama in 2022, and emphasizing the importance to addressing the trade in marine ornamental fishes. And if you allow, I will read you what the EU Parliament told the Commissioner to do. It urges the Commission to adapt the European Trade Control and Expert System Traces database in order to collect and make publicly available accurate information on the species, volume, and origin of all marine ornamental fish in trade, and thus monitor this currently unregulated and often unsustainable trade for which the EU is a major import market. So far, we have not reached this goal yet, but we keep on working on that. But the EU Parliament seems to have understood the problem that there is, and this is a problem that can easily be resolved and could be resolved also for other wildlife. Now I would like to give you some insight into this trade. The trade is pretty old. It has been going on for almost 100 years, but its effects on the environment that it can have never been really understood. And potentially there are over 4,000 species of coral fishes that are involved in the trade. And for now, we know that at least 2,300 species. Recent estimates say that even over 3,000 species are in fact in trade, and the overwhelming majority of these species are wild caught. One peer-reviewed scientific study states that just 24 species are commonly available in trade, and 37 moderately available in trade that have been captive bred. And some 300 and something are in the research phase. So these fishes have maybe laid eggs in captivity, or larvae have grown, but they have never been produced, so they could be sold in pet shops. So this makes just 1 to 2% of all species in trade captive bred. Globally, we know that between 15 and 30 million individuals are caught every year or traded every year, because the level of mortality along the supply chain is unknown. And this trade has been estimated to be worth 1.5 billion annually. This is, of course, not only the fish, but it includes all the technical stuff, the tanks, the feed, and so on. To explain to you why it is so complicated to also monitor this trade and have a clear idea what happens from the beginning where the fish is caught until it gets into a tank in Europe or the US. This is a map, this is a graph or an illustration, just an example from northern Bali where some of the fishes are caught in Indonesia. On the left hand, you have the area where the fishes are collected. And then these fishes go to the villages where the fishermen live and are kept there or brought there in these villages. And from the villages, then they go to the traders. And as you can see, there are more or less about 70 traders in northern Bali alone. And from the traders, then they go to an airport. And you can see Jakarta up here, which is on another island, or Denpasar, and the other places, I don't even know where they are, but they have to be transferred many times. And to get an overview when a fish goes from here to somewhere else is really, really difficult. So the supply chain is extremely fragmented and diffused. The industry this year told me that it's not as complicated anymore. I don't know. That's just what they are saying. I haven't been given any proof of that. And it looks like a lot of stakeholders are involved. It is unknown how many collectors, hundreds or thousands, middlemen, exporters, importers, wholesalers, and retailers are involved in this trade. From our latest publication, we have produced a policy brief, which tries to give you an overall view of what we know for the trade into the European Union. So we have analyzed all the available data from traces. That means 8 years of straight data from 2014 to 2021. And we found that over 60 countries are exporting or exporting to the EU. And the main exporting countries are Indonesia, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, the United States, and Kenya. We have seen that there are multiple local origins and traders for these species, and that most come from the wild. All these species have to go through traces to be allowed to be imported into the EU. And what we found now is that the EU imported under this HS code 03011900 over 43 million fishes. But of these 43 million fishes, 26 million were marine ornamental fishes. The rest was either freshwater fishes or invertebrates, or as I said, we even found a couple of amphibians. So we really cleaned the data. Of these 26 million, 18 million we were able to identify at species level, and the third 8 million was only at family level, which is better than nothing, because this is the best data available worldwide on such a large market. If we then look at how the value is for the EU imports on average 24 million euro worth of fish every year. But I will give you a bit more detail in a second. So if we look at the import countries, at the exporting country, we found 61 exporting countries over these 8 years to the EU, with Indonesia and the Philippines and Sri Lanka being the main exporters, and they made up almost 70% of all individuals. But if we add the United States, Kenya, the Maldives, Singapore, and Israel, we get to even more than 90%. If we look at the importing countries, we have 30 European countries importing these marine ornamental fishes. This includes Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland, because these countries also use traces as a monitoring tool. The United Kingdom is the primary importer of these fishes, at least in traces until 2021, when the United Kingdom left the EU, which is reflected in this graph. You can see here that there are hardly any imports through traces, and that the Netherlands has picked up what was not imported into the UK. It is followed by the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and France. These are the big importers in Europe. And these 5 countries alone make up more than 80% of the imports. If we go to the species and families that are imported, we can see that we found 120 families being imported into the EU, and they came from 1,452 species. The top 12 families, which are depicted here in this graph, make up more than 90% of all imports into Europe, with the wrasses, the Labridae, featuring the most species. It's this bar here. And the damselfishes, the first one, being imported in the biggest number of individuals. Interestingly, we have seen over these 8 years a sharp decline, going from 5 million being imported a year to 2 million being imported a year. And I would like to give you one example of the Chromis viridis that I have talked about already. It's this little green fish here, which lives always in big, large schools. This fish is the most imported fish into Europe, but also into the US. Overall, it's the most traded fish globally. It was traded in 12.4% of all imports to Europe were made up of this fish. And we have seen a 70% decline on the number of imports into Europe for this fish. Interestingly, the IUCN Red List never evaluated this fish until 2022, and it was found to be least concern. But the IUCN Red List also states that the population trends are decreasing. From all the data we gathered, we also tried to have like an indicator, how does the trade, or how could the trade potentially impact the species? And we produced what we call a watch list, which indicates which species might warrant closer monitoring, especially in Europe. It is an easy and straightforward system, and we used the number of specimens traded. The import trends are the numbers augmenting a lot or decreasing a lot. The vulnerability index according to FishBase. FishBase is the repository of all fish knowledge, and it gives an index of the vulnerability depending on life history traits. Is the fish very prolific, or does it have a very long gestation period, and all these things, the biological but also ecological factors. And then also we use the conservation status according to the IUCN Red List, which is based more on population dynamics. Is the species threatened, endangered, or least concern? And this is a very easy and straightforward method to explore if a species could potentially be also threatened through trade. But of course, there are different methods that should be used to really come to a good conclusion. But we find that if a fish is in a threatened or endangered category by the IUCN, it should be monitored in any case. We then went on. This is now not related to traces, but we wanted to know what is the value of this trade, and that's where our economists came into play especially, and we used the UN Comtrade data. And using that trade data for the same HS code on marine ornamental fishes, we were able to evaluate the value of the trade into Europe. And these values are for 2021. And we found that the European Union is the largest importer with regards to value of these fishes. So it represents 35% of the 70 million euro the global trade is worth. It is followed by the North America, China, and then by China, East Pacific and Pacific. But it is very important to know that for the number of specimens imported in the latter countries like China, Asia, and Pacific, but also for Central, South America, Africa, and so on, we do not have any idea how many individuals are represented in the value. The UN Comtrade data gives you value, also a monetary information on the trade, on the good, and it also gives you weight. But for fishes, for example, the weight is not worth anything because these fishes come in bags with water, and the weight represents the fish, including the water. So you can't really explain how many fishes are in 10 kilograms of water, for example. So that's why we were only able to use the value on from UN Comtrade data. Interestingly, as we have seen, the number of specimens are decreasing. But if you look at the value, in Europe, the value is on the rise. It's the blue line. And the overall trend globally is even more pronounced. Even if you put in a large linear regression, you see that it's really on the rise globally. Just to give you two examples, in blue, we have the number of specimens in dark blue coming from Indonesia, and in light blue, the value for these specimens. And as you can see, over these 8 years, the number of specimens entering the EU is decreasing, but the value is increasing again. And if you look then at the brown and yellow line, which is for Kenya, you can see that the number of specimens remains more or less stable, but the value of these specimens is increasing. Now, I would like to put this in a bigger perspective now. I'm almost finished. Coral reefs, the environment these fishes come from, they make up only less than 0.1% of all ocean floors, and they are also very important nursery ground for food fishes. The status of coral reefs of the world is, this is a study that is produced every so often. The one from 2020 states that 50% of the coral reefs have died in the last 50 years due to climate change, the coral bleaching and acidification. I'm sure you have heard of this. The IPCC report from 2018 states that we will see a decline by 70 to 90% of coral reefs if the temperatures reach 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we will virtually lose all coral reefs if the temperatures reach 2% of pre-industrial average temperatures. A UN report, a more recent UN report, states that we are headed to 2.5 to 2.9% degrees. Globally, today we know that we have reached 1.3 degrees of these pre-industrial average temperatures, and my country has already reached 2.8 degrees. So the future for coral reefs looks really, really bleak. And so we are of the opinion that if the environment or the habitat is already endangered as coral reefs are, the coral reef fishes that live in this habitat should also be handled as being endangered or threatened. And just a quick graph that I found this year in a newspaper here in Switzerland, that a professor who had worked on the IPCC reports was asked to state what he thinks of this graph. And just to explain to you, the lines, the light blue lines show you where the sea surface temperatures have been on average every year. So you can see this is from 1982 to 2011. The sea surface temperatures have always fluctuated within these two lines. And these sea surface temperatures are global temperatures, but they exclude the poles because they would screw up everything. And since 2022, the sea surface temperatures have been outside of these blue lines the whole year round. And it has become so stark, and the discrepancy, so it has been so strong, the sea surface temperatures on average, that this professor was interviewed, and he said that if he did not know that this information is correct, he would have thought that it is a measurement error. But in fact, it's real measurement, and it's, to me at least, it's very, very scary. So in conclusion, we would like to say that monitoring wildlife to the EU is very, very important for all the reasons we have said. And that we have a system, a monitoring system, a platform which has been in use for 20 years and is really, really working well. And so there is no need to reinvent a tool. It would be very important to adjust traces to monitor wildlife, even though it's not a specific wildlife tool, of course. To fine-tune traces should only allow species-level information and give the exact origin of a species, and also let you know if it's captive bred with the facility name and origin, and also if it's captive bred or wild caught, the species. It is possible to establish an alert system using traces data, and with different systems you can have a very good idea if trade could be an issue for this species. And it's also important to consider that the import countries should be the ones getting the numbers right, because as you have seen, it is really difficult, at least for marine ornamental fishes, to know all the hands the fish has changed before it entered a tank. And also, we think that the import countries and consumers have a moral and legal obligation to pay. And also the legal framework which exists maybe has to be rethought or looked at more in depth, or it has maybe just has to be applied because it exists. But at the moment, it seems not to be applied all the time. So with this, I thank you very much for your interest. And if you have any more interest in the issue, on our website, procoralfish.org, you can find more information or all the publications that are freely available. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica, for your presentation. Very interesting. So I will open now for questions. If anybody on our audience have some question, please feel free to raise your hand to make yourself a question, or if you are shy, you can drop in the chat and I can ask Monica as well. So I don't know if, oh yes. Let's see, Cameron.
Hey, Monica, I really enjoyed that presentation, learned a lot. One question I have is, you mentioned the watch list, and I'm wondering who the target audience is for that watch list.
The target audience in our paper is that maybe some species need to be put on the appendices of CITES, because CITES has its own system. It can also, it is a legally binding convention, is the only legally binding convention on wildlife. And so it can really issue permits for species to be exported and imported, but it can also prohibit the export or import of species. But it is so difficult to put a species on these appendices because you need to have so much information also on the trade data. And so if you don't have trade data, you can't put the species on the list. And if you can't prove that the species is extremely a lot on the list, like the Chromis viridis, and if you have very few information on the ecology or biology of a species, you can't really make that point. And so it's like, is it called a vicious circle? You can't just get enough information because it's not collected. Or in the case of biological, ecological information, the IUCN has still a lot of species that they should be assessing or that they should be reassessed because the assessment has been more than 10 years old. So it is that would be the target audience, but that's, I think, still a long way to go.
Great, thank you.
I have a question as well. Actually, I have lots of questions for you. Monica, you said something very interesting, because I guess it's something that everybody that works with wildlife trade is always asking about European trade and how to monitor here. And you said that we don't need to reinvent the wheel because we already have the traces. So I'd like to hear from you and also from Ricardo, how feasible is to change these traces to monitor the rest of wildlife trade that's not already monitored by this tool, and what do we need to transform these in a like a more broader tool?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I can start, Ricardo, and then you continue.
Sure. Yeah, just to let you recover.
You know, actually, I was lucky when I started my PhD. I had a personal contact to a technician in traces. Unfortunately, this person retired, and now it is really hard to get a physical, also a knowledgeable person within traces. It's always a person who does the administrative thing, just to get the data. But what actually And this person explained to me that technically it is really easy to adapt traces. And I tried to explain this really quickly by saying that all of a sudden the invasive species was an issue, so they added this to traces. So if you have an invasive species that you want to import, someone else first needs to give you the okay that you are allowed to import. Otherwise, the shipment will go back. So technically, it's really easy to adapt the lists of species. It will take maybe a little bit of time, but technically there is no issue. The issue that we see is really the political will. And specifically for the EU now, the traces database is in another department than the environmental or CITES department. And it is really difficult to make the two discuss this issue. And it seems, I'm not in an EU country, so Ricardo will have to correct me. It seems that there needs to be a regulation which really makes it compulsory that traces has to be adapted, even for all wildlife. And I know there are things going on and surveys going on to go in the right direction, but everything takes a very long time. And so when I was able, or we were able to talk to the member of parliament and that they had this resolution that I presented, I thought, okay, now it's going in the right direction, because even the parliament now saw the problem and sees that it is easy to fix. But nothing happened afterwards. So Ricardo, over to you. You can
Yes, I think when it comes to traces, it's like having a telescope and saying, I cannot see the moon. Well, the only reason you cannot see the moon is if you're using it wrong or the telescope is broken. So the telescope is not broken at all. We have a great tool. We just need to give it a few tweaks. And like Monica was saying, is that you just need to add a list of the scientific names and make it mandatory that you need to list everything under a scientific name, and you can no longer use common names or higher taxonomic categories to name what you are importing. So it is puzzling, because if you were following the law strictly, you would be able to exactly pinpoint where each specimen that entered EU space has ended. And right now it is virtually impossible to do that. So most likely, given the way that the European Union works, there is at least one member state, and if it were more than one, it would even be stronger to actually put this in the agenda and say, we want to do this, like Monica was saying, Switzerland is an associated state, but it's not a member state. So it would be hard to push it from Switzerland or Norway, but we can do this. And again, we know who are the big players in the industry. You have probably 3 really big companies operating in the EU, which probably are responsible for more than 50% of all the animals. Then you have another very interesting thing, is that everything is arriving by airplane. If we were talking about something else that could be collected in local waters, this would be a bigger challenge. But we are talking about goods that always need to clear customs, always need to have a lot of paperwork to actually be imported to the EU. So I think it's more like a lack of awareness on how important it is that is impairing us to move forward, because this is a great tool. Only the fact that it is fully electronic, you have no paper at all. This is just great for anyone to do data mining. This is the dream database that every researcher working with wildlife would like to have. So I think it's just raising awareness, keep talking with the people. Like Monica said, you have 2 different entities within the EU that would somehow be co-responsible to make this happen, but it is incredibly hard to actually make people talk within these branches in these really big organizations. They have their own organic, they have their own priorities, and I think when it comes to wildlife, everybody likes Nemo and Dory, of course, and we are taking advantage of that. And we actually named one of our scientific publications The EU is still unable to find Nemo because it's not using traces properly. But then again, I think that if you move into more, sexy wildlife, if we are talking about mammals, for instance, people pay a lot more attention. It really drives the media significantly. So I think we just need to keep on talking about this because this will end up in the agenda. We're also trying to engage the industry to be part of the solution, because the feedback we have gotten so far is that the official data that we were able to retrieve are not, well, they said it's not even close of what the data that the industry has, even in terms of the most important species. So it is in the best interest for the industry to make this right. Otherwise, decision makers will make decisions based on the official information. And at the end of the day, it will be bad for those that want to protect the species, because you may end up species that don't need protection. And it may also hurt the industry because they may see species that can be sustainably collected from the wild being restricted and actually hurting their business. So for me, it's just mind-blowing that the industry is looking at this from a distance and trying to keep the business as usual policy, when this can literally blow up in their face sooner or later, most likely sooner than later, because like Monica is saying, everybody is aware on how endangered coral reefs are. So if you find a more orthodox NGO that really wants to ban this trade, it's not difficult to engage the people, you know, and actually put a hold on this trade as it exists right now. So if for some unfortunate series of events, the EU decided that no more marine ornamentals are being imported to Europe that were collected from the wild, this industry would collapse, you know, because at present we are able to commercially raise only a handful of species. And from our records, we have more than 1,000 species being heavily traded around. So I don't know. I think, at least if I was working on the industry, I would be rather concerned that we are not getting the data right. Like Monica said, we also need to get enough granularity on the data to make informed decisions, because if you are just receiving data that says that you are importing millions of fishes from Singapore, well, that's completely irrelevant from a conservation point of view, because as Monica well explained, that's just a hub, you know. And then when you start to get legislation a bit more tighter in the EU or the US or other Western countries, what we are starting to see is that suppliers start to move to other emerging markets that are more relaxed in when it comes to this type of issues, like China, like India, and other countries that are really having a role in this trade. We all know how much China bias statistics. When you look at the FAO, you always have graphs for the world with China and without China. And here we are looking at the trade where we have absolutely no clue what's the role of China. And we all know it must be a really, really big role. And we all know that Asian countries love fishes. It's on their tradition. It's something that goes back many centuries. But we have absolutely no idea how many of these animals are actually being collected and shipped to China. So I don't know. I think we just need to keep raising awareness. And yes, the more people push the EU to use traces to track wildlife, because as Monica said, there is absolutely no animal or vegetable or derived item from these that is not mandatory to register on traces. So we have everything that we need to at least be informed.
Oh, thank you very much for these answers. Like, it's a really nice to hear that it's more a matter, in a way, like nice matter of political will than anything else. But I was wondering, like when you were explaining and talking about stuff, like as I told you in the beginning, I work with spider trade, arachnid trade. And for example, for spiders, we have like more than 50,000 species. Let's say in a as a miracle, we can convince people that we have to track all types of animals and plants and organisms in the trade in the EU. How do you think it could work, this the bias and the errors, like, because you were explaining, for example, that many of these fishes are recorded at the family level. So why people, in your opinion, is not like recording in the species level? What is behind this? Is to trick or to cheat the system? What is this? And if you see that this could happen in other taxa, in other groups, and how to prevent this?
I think they do this because they know that they will get away with it. You know, their shipment will not be refused because the information is not detailed at species level. If this starts to be enforced as it should be, then people would be the ones making sure that everything is detailed because they don't want to see a shipment being held on customs, especially when it comes to fishes, because they are in a plastic bag with water and oxygen. But you know, the clock is ticking, so if it stays longer than it should, you start to have mortality, and you may eventually end up losing all your cargo. So I think they just do it because they can, you know, and they know that there will be no penalizations. We have people from the industry saying, yeah, I just tick the box, and people at customs, they have no idea if this is a damsel or if it is an angelfish, or they just sometimes take the bag out of the box and fish. And if the guy is really informed, he may even say marine fish. Otherwise, nobody really cares. I must say, I think that's the only reason. It's like speeding on the highway. If you listen that on that specific day, there will be a lot of police in the highway, you will not speed because you know that there is a high probability that you will get a fee. If you know that nobody will be looking, you speed up. And this is what's happened. You know, in the first place, the system should not allow people to use these higher taxonomic categories, you know, much less common names or stuff like that. Because like Monica said, when it comes to ornamental species, they are pricey. It's probably one of the markets where you can add more value to organisms that probably would have absolutely no commercial value other than being an ornamental species. We see this to a lot of marine organisms, both fish and invertebrates. So they know exactly what they are buying. You know, they are not fooled because they are paying a premium value for those organisms. So if this was enforced, they would not declare names that are not correct or higher taxonomic categories. So it's all a matter of just making things right, because we don't, like we said, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If we had to build something from scratch, this would take forever, you know, and member states would never agree exactly on what the tool should be, you know, and because this is how the EU works, everything takes a lot of time because everybody needs to agree on everything. But this is not the case. We already have the hardest part. You know, I think sometimes I tell to Monica, the house is completely built, and we are just discussing the color of the furniture or something like that. You know, and we forget that the house is already fully built. So the platform is in place. And what is even more puzzling is that all the countries that are exporting to the EU, they are already accustomed to use the platform. It has been translated to many different languages. So there's not even like a barrier here that could say, well, maybe someone in the Philippines or Indonesia or Sri Lanka does not know how to do it. They know how to do it because apart from ornamentals, they also ship other goods to the EU, and it must come under traces. So it's just mind-blowing why we are still discussing this.
But Ricardo, do you think that there is, besides the political will, but resources to inspect these in the borders? Like, I'm talking about spiders because it's what I know, and is exactly the situation that you reported with fishes. Like, oh, okay, this is a brown spider, and that's it. It's the maximum that we can get in the borders, because of course people are not trained, they have no resources. So
Caroline, yeah, I think
we
it's
do
just
this?
I think it's just a matter of awareness. If you are working at customs, probably you will start first looking at drugs or guns or other illegal trade, because here we are talking about legal trade. So this will start going down and down on the priority list. And I can just imagine a guy working at customs saying, oh, now they will also want me to look at fish. Don't you think I don't have enough things to do already? So it's a matter of awareness, of actually just doing some enforcement, because there are some radical measures that you could put in place, but I don't think you need to push that far, because if you do just a random check and you realize that that cargo doesn't have the names right, you would give the guy a warning and say, okay, next time we caught you cheating, there will be consequences, and the hardest consequence is to remove his license, and the guy can no longer import or export to the EU, and that's a huge blow, because that can compromise your business, So there are ways to make enforcement more or less vigorous, I would say. But again, we understand that the people at customs are already overloaded, but since this is something that has an electronic it leaves an electronic trail that you can follow, and we are talking about legal trade, it would be rather easier, in my opinion, to make sure that people are actually declaring what they are importing than in other. I think it may be trickier when it comes to reptiles or amphibians, because people can try to smuggle species that are protected under CITES or that are threatened, but we just use the fish as a case study because we know the market fairly well. And again, everything is arriving by plane. Everything, or most of the things, are being sourced from the wild. So I think it's as a case study to make a point, like, okay, see, we can use this to track that. So I think if you could just wish for 2 or 3 things to fix, you can just say, okay, just log into a reliable database where you have up-to-date taxonomic names, and do not allow anything else apart from 2 names for the scientific name of the species. And this would solve a lot of the issues that we are having to date.
And if I may add, if I may add to what you were asking, I think about the technical side of things. You would just have to add, so I know there is a code for invertebrates, and you would need to add some more specificity. I never know how to say that word, more specific information. And that's just a technical issue. But this has been done the last 20 years. So it's not really a problem. And as Ricardo was saying, as it is legal trade, all the information is already in the system before the goods arrive at the airport or at the train station. So the customs officer doesn't have to do more work. He just gets the more precise list. For him, it's still spiders, for example, but at least he has a list with the names of the spiders, which are important for science, but also for people who are looking at maybe zoonosis. I don't know if spiders can transmit something, but fish could. And if you go higher up the ladder of the taxonomy ladder, there are many more species that could transfer pathogens to human or other animals. So it's really a technical issue and a political will issue than anything else.
Yeah. When it comes to zoonosis or diseases in general, for instance, Europe, in terms of shrimp production, it's like an island that is still has no disease like you have already in Asia or you have in South America. But you can restrict the imports of the shrimp that are produced in aquaculture, but then you may import the ornamental shrimp, and those can also be a vector of disease, you know. So everybody thinks that ornamental are just for decoration purposes, and nobody really realizes when you import an ornamental plant, for instance, it's not only the plant, it's all the microbiome in the roots and the soil that you're also importing with the plant. When it comes to marine aquarium trade, sometimes you import what we call live rocks, and those need to be recorded under CITES. But if you have the paperwork, you just, okay, everything was imported legally, but then it is almost a whole ecosystem that you're already importing, because from bacteria to small invertebrates to seaweeds, everything is there, and it's very easy, especially if you are in Southern Europe, to accidentally release something, you know. Of course, if you are importing tropical organisms and you live in Norway, it's very unlikely, or if you live in Sweden or Finland, where you're based, it's very unlikely that you have something that will become invasive. But if you are living in Southern Europe, and as temperatures go higher and higher, I think you have bigger risks to accidentally introduce something that it's not supposed to be there. And we all know about the case of the lionfish that was introduced in Florida, and that is now spreading all over the Caribbean and damaging marine ecosystems really badly. So it wouldn't surprise me that in like a couple of years, something may be accidentally or even on purpose introduced, because from what I've heard, apparently there were like two theories. One said that it was a marine tank that broke during a hurricane near at a beach house, and the fish were introduced. But the other theory that for me it's more feasible, it was actually a scuba diving club that released two lionfishes in a wreck, and they would take the people to see the lionfish because they kind of stay in the place where you put them. And then it just got out of hand, you know. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me that it could happen also in Southern Europe.
Well, thank you very much. Like it's a lot of things to process. I don't know if anybody else here has some question, the audience, if you feel like asking something. Otherwise, I can make, I think, the last question of our webinar. As I said to you, I probably will message you because I have so many questions about this. But it is interesting that you both are speaking about policies and about the tools that we have available to monitor, to track this trade, but you are also working with the trade, with the public and with the people consuming, I guess. So in your opinion, apart from these tools that we have that you presented so well, the traces and the policies that we have, like CITES and IUCN assessing the extinction risk, what we could do regarding the demand, like the people that are consuming these ornamental fishes, to make this trade more sustainable, or transform what is legal in legal? What do you have to say about the demand side of this trade?
Well, if I may go first, Monica. It's funny that you mentioned that, because we're actually working on a publication that also addresses that, which has to do with what we call sustainability, or what we call welfare. You know, there are many things that you can do to raise awareness. So what we want the customer, the final user, that will be either private or public owners of aquariums, to do, is to make informed decisions, you know. So you can have the power to decide, okay, I will buy this because this is something that I know that was taken care properly, it was taken under the right conditions, and it was like sustainable, or I don't want this because this is not sustainable at all. So I think it's just educate the consumer, and then let the people do their own choices, as long as they are informed choices. And we always say that it must be always highlighted that this is with the best scientific information available to date. You know, we all know that science evolves and changes, and yeah, I think that would be it: raising awareness and let the people do informed choices.
And maybe if
Monica,
I can that, yes, just quickly, in Europe or in the EU at least, there are endeavors to use positive lists for the pet trade, and a couple of countries have already positive lists, at least for some mammals. But often, or most of the times, fishes are excluded, and don't even talk about invertebrates. But there are at least some endeavors to go into that direction, that just a group of specific animals are allowed to be imported as pets. So in the case of marine ornamental fishes, I think I would know which fishes should be allowed and which shouldn't, which would restrict a lot the trade. But yeah, this is still, yeah, it's not happening in a large scale yet. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for your inputs and your answers. So I have to say, like, I'm very impressed with your research. Monica, like, you dealing with the papers, like something mind-blowing, you know, like what you had to do, and also like all the knowledge that you and Ricardo have at this moment about this trade. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, your expertise with us. And I'd like to thank people that are participating here, listen to us when it's in the YouTube channel. Thank you, the GLITSS, for having us, like, to propose this workshop. I think if you have anything else that you want to add at this point, or do you have any final message or anything that you would like to end this session with?
Well, I would just like to thank you for the opportunity to present our work. And I don't know if Ricardo has something more to add.
I think it's just that it was great being able to share what we have been doing, and the more people push forward to use traces to also monitor wildlife, the more likely it is that the EU will do something about it and actually make the adjustments that need to be made to actually make that possible, or at least more efficient.
So thank you very, very much for your presence here. Thank you, GLITSS. Cameron's here, so thank you very much. And well, I look forward to see you many at the future events of GLITSS. Thank you, Monica, again. Thank you, Ricardo and GLITSS, Cameron, and wish you all a great day.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Take care.
all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.